How was everybody's weekend? All right. Yeah. Happy Juneteenth. All right. Good morning. I'm Jonathan Bowles. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Urban Future. It is so nice to be here on such a great June morning. Thank you all for coming. Thanks also to everybody. There's about 150 people tuning into our live stream right now. Thanks for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to Wells Fargo for their support, for their partnership, and for being a big part of this and making this happen today. The Center for an Urban Future, in case you don't know, is an independent think tank focused on creating a stronger and more inclusive economy in New York and expanding economic opportunity for all New Yorkers. In just the past year, our work spurred a private foundation to invest in a new startup competition explicitly for entrepreneurs living in public housing across New York City. We also directly inspired City Council Speaker Adrian Adams to create CUNY Reconnect, a first-of-its-kind initiative to re-enroll working adults at CUNY. We contributed to a new $15 million city investment to expand dedicated teen centers in libraries across the city. Over the years, CUF has written numerous reports urging city officials to harness the tremendous entrepreneurial potential in underserved communities across the 5 boroughs. But it's also always been clear to us that New York has to do a lot more than just support aspiring entrepreneurs and brand new business owners. We also need to ensure that our new and existing businesses have the tools and resources to succeed, and in many cases, to grow into medium-sized and large businesses. There's now an enormous opportunity across New York City to provide this kind of support. Since the start of the pandemic, communities from the South Bronx to Sunset Park have experienced an unprecedented surge in new businesses. Between 2019 and 2021, our research found a 30% increase in new business applications across the 5 boroughs, with the biggest percentage increase taking place in the Bronx. But it's not a given that most of these new enterprises will be able to thrive. Indeed, before the pandemic, a disproportionate share of the city's minority and immigrant-owned businesses closed or failed to achieve meaningful growth. I'm really excited that today's panel discussion will delve into what's needed to make sure that things are different this time around and that more of our newest businesses are set up to succeed and grow. We have an amazing group of speakers here to delve into these issues today. Thanks to all of them for being here. A big thank you to Kevin Kim, the Commissioner of the Department of Small Business Services. Also a big thank you to Kevin Riley, City Council Member, both of whom will be on our second panel this morning. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce one of our sponsors for today's event. And I want to give another big thank you to Wells Fargo. They are our partners in this event. They really helped us kind of envision this panel today. And they've been so great across New York City for small business. And now we're it's our great pleasure to be joined by one of their leaders, John Morellis. John is Wells Fargo's Senior Vice President for Growth Strategy and Development and a real leader in their small business banking. Please join me in welcoming John.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Wow, it's bright up here. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. As he shared, my name is John Morellis. I serve the interest of small businesses on the East Coast as the Growth Strategy and Development Director at Wells Fargo. And on behalf of all our colleagues at Wells, I'd like to welcome you to the Center for Urban Futures, Sustaining New York City's Entrepreneurial Boom, Helping the City's Newest Businesses Succeed and Grow Policy Symposium. This event will shine light on the issues minority and immigrant-owned small businesses are facing as they continue their journey towards a brighter future for their businesses, our city, and our nation. New York is often defined by its small businesses and its neighborhoods, diverse neighborhoods. While economic challenges continue to face small businesses, we as a company are focused on fostering an inclusive recovery and strengthening the small business sector for the long term. The head of our segment often says, small business is big business. I say often, small businesses are too big to fail. Our goal is to help as many small businesses as we can, with a strong emphasis on supporting the needs faced by diverse small business owners. In fact, supporting diverse owners is at the heart of the creation of our Open for Business Fund, Wells Fargo's industry-leading effort, which has donated roughly $420 million to support non-for-profits and certified development financial institutions, otherwise known as CDFIs, who serve small businesses. Over the past 2.5 years, grants from the Open for Business Fund have been awarded to more than 235 CDFIs and non-for-profits serving small businesses across the US. It's estimated that we've served more than 152,000 small businesses and preserved or created more than 255,000 jobs. This effort and how quickly we recognized a serious problem and took action is something that needed to be done, and frankly, something that I'm very proud of. Since then, we've also collaborated with Community Reinvestment Fund USA to launch the Small Business Resource Navigator, an online portal that enables Wells Fargo bankers to help introduce small business owners to potential financing options and technical assistance through community development financial institutions, again, across the country. In its first full year of operation, the Small Business Resource Navigator has connected nearly 1,200 small businesses to potential credit opportunities and technical assistance, again, provided by CDFIs. We've also launched a website dedicated to support diverse small business owners, which you can find at wellsfargo.com/biz. Again, wellsfargo.com/biz. I'm very proud of the work we're continuing to do to support diverse business owners, specifically our contributions and our support for programs or organizations as the Center for Urban Future. And I look forward to doing more. I hope that you find today's conversation insightful and enlightening. And again, thank you all. With that, Eli will continue with the program. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Fantastic. Well, my name is Eli Dvorkin. As John said, I'm the Editorial and Policy Director at the Center for an Urban Future. It's my pleasure to moderate this morning's conversation on such an interesting topic and with such a stellar group of panelists. So let me begin just by briefly introducing them, although they may need no introduction in this room, and then we'll get right into the conversation. I'll just mention, especially for those folks tuning in online, you can tweet at us at NYC Future with any questions. We're going to save time at the end of this panel today for some questions from the audience, virtual or in person. Folks in the house, let us know that you have a question by raising your hands at the end of our discussion, and a colleague will come around with a microphone to get to as many questions as we can. So to kick things off, I'll start on the far end. We're joined today by Greg Bishop. Greg, I'm not going to throw you a hot question just yet. I'll just introduce who you are.
I took this side to make sure.
You know, I've got a good line of sight. So, Greg is the executive director of the Social Justice Fund, an initiative of the Joe and Clara Tsai Foundation focused on creating racial justice and economic mobility in Brooklyn. Greg previously served as the commissioner of the New York City Department of Small Business Services, where he helped connect businesses to over $200 million in capital and certified a record 9,000 MWBEs, among many other accomplishments during his term. Greg, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All the way from Brooklyn. We're also joined today by Yanki Sharing. Yanki is the founder and executive director of Accompany Capital, which supports New York area immigrant, refugee, and underserved entrepreneurs as they launch and grow their businesses by providing them with access to affordable credit, with financial education, technology training, and best business practices. Yanki, welcome.
Thank you.
We're also joined today by Danielle Sherry. Danielle is an entrepreneur. Give me a round of applause for an entrepreneur on the panel as well. I know, especially taking time out of your day, Danielle, when you've got a lot of other things going on, so we appreciate you being here. She's also a self-trained artist based in Brooklyn. She's the founder of award-winning home decor business, DMC Original Art, where she's handcrafted nearly 3,000 pieces of art. Is that my 3-year-old taking a nap so early? No. Where she's handcrafted nearly 3,000 pieces of original art, from coasters to wall paintings, for customers across the country. Congratulations on all your success, Danielle. Great to have you with us. We're also joined today by Blondell Pinnock. Blondell is the president and CEO of Bedford Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation, the nation's first community economic development corporation dedicated to closing the racial wealth gap in central Brooklyn. Blondell previously served as Chief Operating Officer at Greater Jamaica Development Corporation, Chief Lending Officer at Carver Federal Savings Bank, and as a Deputy Director in the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development as well. Blondell, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we're also joined today by Lisa Soren. Lisa is the is the president of the Bronx Chamber of Commerce, the new Bronx Chamber of Commerce,
Right.
which mobilizes members, the private sector, and philanthropic partners to build equitable economic opportunities in the Bronx for businesses and for residents. Lisa previously served as executive director of the Westchester Square Business Improvement District and has worked with a whole number of nonprofit and civic organizations. Lisa, welcome. Glad to have you with us. So as we talked about a little bit up front, we see this as a huge opportunity for New York City right now, this growth and new business formation. And frankly, I think we could all use some good news after the past 3.5 years. It's been a pretty steady drumbeat of bad news. And this is something that really strikes us as a golden opportunity for New York. This level of business formation that exceeds where we were in 2019, where we're seeing growth in all 5 boroughs, led by the greatest number of new businesses in Brooklyn, by the fastest growth rate in the Bronx. But as Jonathan mentioned, we want to make sure that we don't also see the same challenges that hurt so many businesses in New York City, in particular disproportionately harmed Black-owned businesses, minority and immigrant-owned businesses during the pandemic. The challenges with access to capital, the struggles without having the cash reserves to be able to cushion that kind of an economic blow. So the question I think in front of us today is, how do we keep this going? How do we ensure that the entrepreneurial energy that is really coursing across the 5 boroughs right now translates into businesses that are sustainable, that are as many as possible actually able to grow, to be able to expand their economic impact? And how do we get at some of the challenges that hurt businesses going into the pandemic that may also be inhibiting the growth of some businesses right now? And I thought, to make sure we can kind of set the table, set the stage for everybody in the room and everybody tuning in online, I'd like to maybe start with Blondell and Greg and ask you a little bit about, the numbers that we're seeing. We're seeing that the formation statistics show more new businesses getting their start in Brooklyn than any other borough. Are you both seeing it on the ground? When you walk around the streets of Brooklyn, from Crown Heights to Bed-Stuy, downtown Brooklyn, going down to South Brooklyn, do you see the kind of growth and entrepreneurial energy translating at the storefront level? Do you see it from the business owners that you're talking to every day? What does this entrepreneurial wave look like in Brooklyn right now?
Oh, you're gonna. Oh, well,
Because you're at the far end.
I was gonna start by saying that wave is being led by Black women. We have a loan program. Clara Usai and Josai, who, after the murder of George Floyd, committed $50 million of their personal wealth to address economic mobility in Brooklyn. The first thing we did right after the pandemic, to your point, was to figure out how to actually have a loan fund, but that sort of address the systemic barriers that many Black entrepreneurs face, which is, I need collateral and I need a guarantor. So we went in terms of creating a character-based loan program. We committed $2.5 million to that program, and over 81 businesses we've actually lent to, over 2.1 million. 70% have been Black women. So what that's saying to us is the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs in Brooklyn are not actually being serviced by our lenders, right? And so that is something that we need to have a conversation about. How do you look at risk in a different way? Brooklyn is also, I think, a unique, I always remind people we're the size of the city of Chicago. So for those out there who think, oh, it's just a borough, I can't do this in my city. No, you can, because we have not only residents, but we have businesses. We have sort of a unique ecosystem, which is why Brooklyn sort of fared a little bit better after the pandemic. You'll see people working from home, they lived in Brooklyn, right? And so instead of being in Midtown, going to the local bar, restaurant, et cetera, they went to their local restaurant, bar, et cetera, in their neighborhood. So you're seeing sort of when you talk about urban planning, you're seeing sort of like a case study in terms of how to build neighborhoods that people can actually live, work, and play.
Thanks, Greg.
And see, that was a perfect segue to restoration. So we're definitely seeing what Greg talked about on the street. We're seeing that, we're seeing the growth of businesses. We're definitely seeing after George Floyd and the pandemic, quite frankly, it was an inflection point. And you started to see a lot of people making the decision to change their business model and change what they're doing. A lot of people decided that they were gonna either work from home, start their own online business, and we're starting to see that the numbers are starting to bear out when we take a look at that. But understanding that all this growth that we're seeing, I think we want to make sure that when another economic downturn happens, and one will happen, we know that for sure, that we are prepared in a much better way to make these businesses not only survive, but to thrive. And I think the things that Greg talked about is patient capital is very, very important. I think the other points that restoration does through our Brooklyn Business Center is we're providing technical support and operational support to help standardize operations of many of these businesses, whether it's startup phase or even mature businesses, because we find that even mature businesses still need assistance in that way. And I think people tend to forget that just because I've been operating for 2, 3, 4 years does not mean that I don't need the operational support in sustaining my business. And then also what I found in my role, both working at Carver and working at a CDFI, within our communities, with minority businesses, Black-owned businesses, Native-owned businesses, there's a trust gap. Besides the wealth gap, besides a credit gap, there is a trust gap because they, because of systemic racism, they've been at the brunt of not receiving the capital assistance they need for traditional resources. So it makes them hesitant to go to those resources again. And when they do go, they wind up paying usually much more than their white counterparts.
Thanks, Blondell. It's really helpful. And I'd like to kind of get back into kind of laying all these specific challenges out on the table. But I did want to bring in, Lisa, just to ask a little bit more about the growth that you might be seeing, given that the Bronx shows up in this data as seeing a faster increase than any other borough compared to 2019. Is that what it looks like to you in the Bronx? Are you seeing new businesses forming in the Bronx, and what does that look like?
It looks like a miracle, I will say. I think that I echo with my colleagues. We are seeing a huge upsurge, and I think, there's always a silver lining to things that happen. So COVID may have taken a hit, but what's come out of it is entrepreneurs who were doing business from home, they had ideas, and this gave them an opportunity to come and shine with the community as support. So we're looking at brewing makers and unique arts, dance, singers are coming, and these beautiful organizations that are coming together and very unique. So what we've seen at the Chamber is a huge growth of young, the majority minorities, if not almost all of them, that come through with these unique ideas and businesses. So when we're sitting at the Chamber and we're going out, what we're seeing is a new trend, which we're thrilled about. And I think the main concern is sustainability, right? Because you're seeing this growth. I think, respectfully to the Brooklyn group or to others, they're being priced out. So I think the Bronx is like this safe haven to start a business safely and allow us to be able to handhold a lot of our businesses because we're small enough, but there's so much potential for growth. So we're seeing it on a daily basis, and it's truly refreshing and gives us some hope in what our borough's going to look like moving forward.
Thanks, Lisa. Well, speaking of hope, Danielle, you're here having been one of those New Yorkers, those brave New Yorkers who actually took the leap and started a business in 2020. Tell us about your business. I mean, how did you get this started? What was the idea that got you to this point? And what's been your experience so far?
Sure. So I have been painting actually for about 10 years. So my business really started as a hobby. And during the pandemic, as we were home, I started painting more and sharing my process because it's also my form of meditation. And as I was sharing my process with friends and family on social platforms, it started to go up a notch. And that's when I decided, okay, let me open up an Etsy shop. And I began to make some sales, and I decided to go further with that. So as people were seeing what I was doing, they began not only to support by purchasing my products, but by sharing resources with me. So I had friends saying, oh, have you heard of Start Small, Think Big? Have you heard of the Brooklyn Public Library's Power Up Business Plan competition? And that's when I realized I was actually venturing off into developing a business and becoming a business owner, which was exciting but scary at the same time because I have no background in business at all. And I knew that if I didn't have the expertise in what it takes to build a business, I needed to go into the spaces where resources were available to me to help me build that out. And SCORE mentor program was also very beneficial in helping me sort of take on that extra hat of business ownership and how to prepare for it. So my experience has been transitioning from balancing creativity with entrepreneurship, but also experiencing some challenges as well as far as accessing capital and raising awareness of my brand. Some of the things that I've been doing recently has been participating in a lot of vendor events, and that's really been helping as far as like going out into different boroughs and sharing what I create and seeing what the reaction, the response is from consumers in real time, which has been really helpful. But as far as getting to larger markets and sort of branching out in that way, that's been a bit of a challenge for me.
Thanks, Danielle. Will you talk a little bit about kind of sustaining the business, or how, once you've gotten it going, how do you kind of keep it going? And you mentioned some of the resources that were helpful along the way. And so, Yankee, I wanted to bring you in because you are one of those resources,
Yes,
a company
we are.
capital. I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit about, for a business owner who has never taken on a loan capital before, they've got an LLC, they've got their business plan, they've just gotten started. What do you see as kind of the major challenges that come next? What is it about step 2 or step 3 that's so challenging? And what do you think is needed to kind of get over it?
Very good question. And I think if we had answers to all those questions, we would probably be sitting at one of those fancy forums in Switzerland. It is a very good question. And someone just sent me a link to, the study of the Ample ice cream company. I think there was an article in the New York Times, what helped them, what didn't, what led to, the challenges they had. So we were internally, thinking of businesses we've assisted and that have the potential to grow. And somehow or the rather, and maybe not by accident, they all tend to be women-owned businesses. So getting back to your question, Eli, capital is key. We recently surveyed about 300 women-owned businesses, and they said access to capital, but the right capital, line of credit, term loan, and very often CDFIs, we're very well-meaning, we're very diligent, we're very, we meet the client, where they are, but we may not have, all those products. So I'm thinking of, as an example, we have Awa Koneti. She first came to us for a small loan to rent a chair. Then, after 3 loans, she was able to rent space and actually rent out chairs to other hair braiders. So what did she need? She needed the right type of capital. She needed a resource, and she also needed someone she could speak to, like a sounding board. We call that technical assistance in our sector, but it's really information on, resources, free resources, so she wouldn't be spending her money. And I think that's where CDFIs and credit unions, I saw Samira here, I think does an excellent job. I saw someone from Pons Bank, several other CDFIs. So I would say that, they need the right capital, they need a good marketing plan, access to markets. That's where they always have a big challenge. So how can SPS, which has a much more important platform, provide that help? And, the Opportunity Fund, which was recently launched, and, it was a perfect example of what New York City needs and what CDFIs need. I think they just celebrated, I don't know if Commissioner Kim is here, but they just celebrated the milestone of making 50 million in loans. So access to capital, I think, is critical. Someone you can reach out to and find out about free resources. The business pitch competition, I don't know how much you won, but Brooklyn, what is it, the Brooklyn Library excels in that, and we've been, taking a page out of their book, and we have a few business pitch competitions because that's capital. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Eli, but capital, marketing assistance, a good sense of, financial management, and the other biggest challenge many of our businesses have is the high cost of real estate. So we have about, I would say, 6 to 20 businesses. We hope over the next few years we can help them to purchase their own property, whether it's for manufacturing or for retail. The SBA has a great program. I know Ponds Bank has been doing a very good job in the Bronx, in that area, and True Fund has a product similar to the SBA 504. So when we talk about growth, the 20% of the clientele we're working with, they say their biggest challenge is the high cost of real estate. You can grow, but at some point, if you're renting the space, you just have no control over expanding your business.
I'm smiling because, like, Yankee saw my notes. So now I have nothing to say. But I just really want to put a finer point on that capital, right? Because one of the things we're most proud of with our loan fund was actually from application submission to closing was less than 14 days, right? And I think that is also an important thing for a lot of business owners because they need that capital, the right size capital. So that's why our character lending.
The right product.
Exactly. Our there's a lot of character-based lending out there, but they max out at $10,000, right? We went up to $100,000. So you want to make sure you get the right amount of capital to the businesses at the right time. But if you notice, like Danielle talked about all the things that we know businesses need in terms of mentorship, community, right? This weekend, I'm very excited off of Juneteenth, but when you think about Juneteenth and Juneteenth weekend, there's an amazing organization called The Layout that was out in Fort Greene Park. They have a vendor market, Buy Black, right? That's community. There's an amazing Black-owned bar in Brooklyn, Ode to Babel, which is moving. Over 2,000 people descended in that area to support that business. That's that community you're talking about. And so when you talk about what businesses need, they need access to that community and markets, right? And so that's some of the things that the city can do is create that sort of like environment. And I know that, anyway, I'll stop right there, but yes.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So I'm going to add a little bit to that, and not just on the capital, but I think it's also on education.
Yep.
Because what I find, for those who know the Bronx has had the smallest amount of loans provided, the least amount of applications. And so I think what happens is, what we have seen is the lack of access to information. And when you have that information, how do you prepare your business to be able to access these loans or grants? And that's been super challenging for us. And through our Small Business Resource Network, we're learning more and more about what these small business entrepreneurial individuals need. And I think education above everything else on how to prepare their finances. During COVID, it was fascinating to look at how unprepared the financials are for the majority of these businesses. And when it was time to apply, their books were everywhere, right? It worked in the moment. But when you're talking about being prepared for these major loans or for access to other capitals, they weren't prepared. So we've spent the last couple of years working with businesses and trying to get them to understand the importance of, creative accounting is one thing and everybody does it. But there has to be the other side of that accounting where you're prepared your books for, to be able to access that money. And I think that comes from the ability to access information that a lot of immigrant minorities don't, right? You start with this fabulous idea of starting a business and you're putting all your passion, but then comes the real work. And I think that's where either the city, organizations like ours, really have to dig in there and do some hand holding.
It's so, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I'm going to say, I think that's where organizations like the Brooklyn Business Center, that's where CDFIs, that's where the banks come in that have that type of resources to do the hand holding. And I think one of the things that we have to walk away with from the pandemic is that we have to ensure that these businesses are prepared and that they have the financial resources, but not only that, that their books are in order, that they have their documents in place. And I do think the other important thing that Danielle mentioned that I see a lot in Brooklyn is the networking and is the creation of the ecosystem. Because to your point, knowledge is the issue. Knowledge is the issue. And for many people, they just don't have and have not sat at a table and had conversations about what it takes to start a business, to keep a business going, and to know that there are other resources that are out there, whether it's funding, whether it's just networking, whether it's vendors, even just resources with respect to marketing, with respect to accounting services and legal services, negotiating leases, and other things. I mean, I think these are the things that businesses need. And my hope is that we can have connection with the city to help organizations like ourselves to be able to provide those resources for businesses this time and keep them that way and keep them prepared so that when something else does happen, it's very easy for them to just be able to press a button and have their numbers and have all their documentation in one place.
I have something
Sorry,
to
go
add
ahead.
to that. So one of the things that I noticed is that when I would mention what my needs were with my business, someone would definitely say, okay, check in with this organization. So I definitely wanted to make sure my finances were in order. And one of the organizations I work with was NY PACE. And they paired me with a group of advisors for one of their cohorts to help me develop a comprehensive financial spreadsheet, which was really helpful. Last year, I participated in a vendor event on the plaza at Bedside Restoration, which was really exciting. It was one of my first vendor events last year with Together We Thrive, and it was during NYC by Design Week. And one of the representatives from Small Business Services was there, handing out business cards, asking if we were certified as MWBE, which I wasn't at the time. I am now, very exciting. And I am because someone was present. Handing out business cards, asking us questions, what we need help with, how they can support us. And over the weekend at one of the events that I participated in at City Point Mall with The Spot, there were about 40 vendors there. And a lot of them had the same sort of needs where they're like, oh, I could use help with this and that. And they weren't tapped in with the organizations that are providing the resources. And if someone was there to sort of just give that information and let them know that we're here to help you, that goes a long way. Everyone doesn't know exactly where to go. But if you came to us during these events, that's a great way to sort of bridge that gap.
I think that was one of the points I wanted to make is that, when government creates programming, the budget is solely focused on programming, not marketing, right? And it's a hard conversation to have, like sitting down in front of OMB, which is the Office of Management and Budget. We need X amount of dollars just to take over a subway station. Or they're going to want to see the return on that investment. And if they're sort of have to make a decision on, do we have additional shelters or do we give you money for marketing? You understand sort of the challenge. And that's where the private sector could come in, I think, right? In terms of helping the city do a better job in terms of consistent marketing, because there's always marketing for the launch of a program. But remember, these programs have been around for time and time. And so, when the city has all these great resources that's available, Danielle and newer entrepreneurs, they don't know it because she's just coming into entrepreneurship. And so the city has to have a sustained sort of program in terms of how to continue marketing their services. And I think that is one of the things that, we could have a conversation in terms of how the private sector can help.
Just to add to your comments, and I know you used to work for the city before.
which is why I could say that, because I've had those conversations.
Good advice.
So now you're on the other side.
Exactly.
But, just as an example, I think the Opportunity Fund, and I don't want to keep harping on that, it was, an excellent in terms of private-public partnership. I know Goldman Sachs, MasterCard, they invested money. And we went to the press conference in the morning. 2 hours later, we came back to our desks, and we're one of the CDFIs that were participating and, involved in underwriting the loans. We had 500 loan requests. So instead of getting upset, our staff really had a good attitude, We're one of those, mid-sized CDFIs. Compared to banks, we're probably very, very tiny. But it really taught us a lot. And it, forced us to rethink the system of reviewing loan requests. So that's a perfect example. That's the sort of platform we need. And I think Opportunity Fund is a perfect example of how, the city could be assisting us to get the word out about our services.
Well, I wanted to ask a little bit more about this, and Blondell as well, thinking about all the different programs that you offer at Bedside Restoration. I'm really struck by the common themes here around what's actually working, the one-on-one technical assistance, obviously, yes, access to capital, but also support for getting your books in order, being able to build community around something like marketing that really has a greater impact, because it's not only the revenues that business is making, right, but the connections you're making to other folks who can help direct you to these resources. And one thing that just strikes me over and over again is just how we benefit so much as a city from all of these incredibly excellent organizations working on the ground. But the scale of almost all of these programs or services is really so small. We're talking about 53,000 new business applications just in Brooklyn, and community lenders or community development organizations. You've got a business serving program that maybe is a few dozen, right? You've got lenders like a company capital who may be making a few hundred loans, when clearly there's need out there to go much beyond that. But as multiple folks have pointed out already, it's not like if you just build it, they will come. There are resources that are out there that don't end up being tapped by entrepreneurs. So I wanted to get a little bit more into the weeds here, if you will, about what should city policymakers do about this? What should the mayor be doing on this? Or Greg, your successor, and we'll hear from him as well in a minute. Maybe they can deputize you to go in there and talk to OMB on his behalf. I don't know if that would be helpful. But when it comes to scaling up what's working, so maybe it's helping our great CDFIs, who we know that among borrowers, CDFIs are only providing less than 1% of all of the small business capital in New York City today, right? But they're uniquely well positioned to help under-resourced entrepreneurs who could benefit from that kind of character lending, although ideally there's additional resources to go from what may be the current underwriting period to 14 days, like what you were able to do, Greg. And then there's organizations where it may be the issue of how do we actually help reach more of the entrepreneurs who would benefit from our services. So I wanted to ask you, the theme here was marketing, but it really touches on so many of these different areas, as well as the resources needed to actually scale up the programs that you all think these are the ones to invest in. These are the ones where that return on investment is significant and where there's ample room for them to grow, with the right resources to help actually bring in the customers the clients who would benefit. So I just want to ask all of you, any thoughts about how do we scale up what's working? How do we actually increase our capacity as an ecosystem to provide more of these services that are actually having a benefit?
Well, I think in addition to just funding for capital that's necessary for these businesses, there's also funding that has to happen for these CDFIs and for these organizations, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to hire enough people that will be able to reach the multitude of businesses that are out there. And we cannot do the work. And you're talking to a woman who worked at a black bank that was a CDFI. I worked for a hyperlocal CDFI in Queens, and now working at Restoration. So I understand what the needs are from a capacity standpoint. There's but so much that we can do. So yes, we do need money to provide capital. We do need money for loan loss reserves also. But we need money to be able to hire individuals that have the skill set that would be able to work with Yankee, to be able to work with Greg, and that would be able to work with myself and with the bids. And other banks that just need it. Because when you are working with businesses, it truly is a one-to-one ratio, because you are hand-holding that business, because they really don't know what type of loan or capital they need in order to get their business going. So it's this one-on-one back and forth that needs to happen, and it's time. It takes time. So that's why organizations like ourselves that are on the ground, it's easy for us because we can take that time to help you put your books together, and get your financing in order, and set up QuickBooks, and then get you to package and get you to a CDFI. Or package and get you to a bank. So it is important, but again, we need capital in order to do that, because that takes time. Because while that one person's working with that one business, there are about 15 other businesses that are waiting to get that same specialized one-on-one attention.
So I'm going to add to that, if I may. So backtrack just a little bit. I think the city needs to play a bigger role. I think the education portion or the availability of information, they may be providing a lot of it, but it's not getting out there, whether it's the digital divide. You know, this young lady is all in on learning the product. Others are just looking to put the product out. So I believe in the train the trainer type thing. If there's information to be had, then you have to look to organizations, plug for the chamber, organizations that are on the ground providing these services, because then it's a trail of information that's coming down and not getting lost in the system. You know, a lot of our small businesses all here go to the website, right? And that's fine and dandy, but when you're sending entrepreneurs, keep in mind, we're talking micro businesses, right? Everything, the majority of all businesses in our borough are micro businesses under 20 and realistically under 10 employees. Do they have the wherewithal to research websites or to take these type of trainings? And we have to make it available. I also think that the bigger picture for these entrepreneurs is, let's look at the regulations, the permitting process, how do you start your business in New York City? And let's be slightly negative and say it's really hard. It is really hard to maneuver the bureaucracy of starting a business. So you're well-intended, you're putting your all, and you seem to get these blockades along the way, and then you need people to like walk them out of that. So yes, with education, yes, with capital, but I think the bigger picture is we all have to be on the same page. And although we're all well-intended, I think there's a gap in communication between us and the city and the small entrepreneurs and the city. So I think it somehow we need to close that gap. I don't have the answer for it. I know the problem exists, and we talk about it all the time, and the trust issue is massive. You know, you walk into a store and we're coming well-intended, and they're like, are you the city? Are you government? And they shut down. So it takes us a lot of visits to one same store or, you know, retail establishment to be able to get that level of confidence. But I think overall, to be able to build capacity is remove some of the barriers. I think it's recognizing that the definition of small business within the city of New York is really 500 and under. And to us, that's not a small business. A small business is a tiny business. It's a mom and pop. And that definition in of itself should allow for regulations to fit the business in which you're dealing with. But when they're thrown into these small business categories, our small entrepreneurs get lost in the system. And I think that's a major problem for us.
I'd like to add to that as far as getting lost in the system, which I think is I'm experiencing. Well, I'll say because there have been so many businesses that have been developed since the pandemic, it makes it even more competitive to access the capital. And then as an artist, it makes it even more competitive because it's like, well, how important is art? But it is very important. And so I feel like one of the ways to combat that is by helping us tell our stories. Help us get to those markets and the wider consumer bases that we can say what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we can create an impact with our work, why it's important to the community, and how the community can become a part of what we're doing. Because otherwise, we're just going to continue to get lost as businesses continue to develop.
So, yeah, if I'm done.
Yeah.
We need to hear from the entrepreneur first, most critical.
Exactly.
So, you know, getting back to what Blondell said about, you know, low-cost capital, grants, so we can build capacity, hire more people. There's also a responsibility, I think, on CDFIs to function more efficiently, and we got that message during the pandemic, using technology, streamlining our process, but not losing that personal touch, which you mentioned. I think that's so critical. But I'm not so hopeful about getting funding from the city, I'll be quite honest, because I don't think they have the budget, or, I mean, at least that's the message we get. So we're relying a lot on, you know, funders like Wells Fargo. They funded us during the pandemic, city community development, and a lot of the banks, you know, went out of their way to see how they could be helpful. And we'll also be, you know, we've also approached many of the foundations. So what's critical and what's not known is for every dollar we get from the federal government, you have to have a non-federal match. At Blondell, I don't know if you have that issue. So very often, a lot of money is left at the federal level because we don't have the non-federal match. We rely very heavily, CDFIs, on the CDFI fund, on the Small Business Administration. These are all federal funders. So, hopefully things will change at the city level, but I know they're also cash strapped. So I don't know if they, have the capacity to fund us. But, one thing where they could be helpful is publicizing what we do, make it known. And SBS has been doing a good job. I will, I have to admit. we work very closely with them, and, they've been helping us, but we've relied a lot on private funding. Even during COVID, we needed a, line of credit, and we got it through, I think there was a federal, loan facility through Wells Fargo, so we could make the PPP loans. And, any funders here, please also fund our trade association, Opportunity Finance Network. They've done incredible work and support CDFIs, so.
Yeah, can I ask you just one quick follow-up? And Greg, I'll definitely want to get you in this as well, but just about the issues with the loan loss reserves. We published a report in December about the real opportunity to boost immigrant and minority-owned businesses in New York City by strengthening CDFIs. And it really talked about the capacity challenges that CDFIs face and the opportunity to help expand their impact. One of the things that came up was the challenges around drawing down more of those federal dollars. And one of the potential opportunities that came up was NYC EDC's Neighborhood Credit Fund. Is that a facility that any of you have tapped into before? If not, I wouldn't be surprised because I think it was only about $2 million in total. But it seems like it was specifically designed to be a match.
So,
and
I'm glad you reminded me about that because I think I called them like 10 times and they said, we can't, we're not taking in more new CDFIs.
So that may be a free idea for EDC out there. So there's demand, it's working, but it was an interesting model to say, hey, this is a way that a flexible agencies can get some dollars out to CDFIs to help offset the reserve.
So Eli, one good news, I know the report that Cuff published on CDFIs, I have to thank you guys. You raised the issue of loan loss reserve. So fortunately for us, Empire State Development has the CAP program. I don't know, Blondell, if you guys participate. But I would say, March of 2020, I think that's when COVID hit, they ran out of money. Oh my God. So recently, they got funding. So now they're, providing loan loss reserve.
I think so going back to the beginning of the conversation when Blondell said the words that I also was going to talk about, which is patient capital, right? When you think about patient capital, what we're really saying is that, whether it's our private sector, whether it's our financial institutions, our foundations, philanthropy in general, that's where the patient capital has to come in. When we committed $2.5 million to actually a CDFI in Brooklyn Chamber, we said we don't want the money back, right? And so that money now stays circulating within the community, and then they were able to leverage the money that we gave them, the chamber, to then tap into the federal sort of like reserves and also other lenders, right? And so that patient capital is important. And I agree. We want the city to do a lot, right? But the city, even though the budget is $110 billion, and not doom and gloom, most of that funding is coming from real estate taxes, and we have a cliff coming up, right? And so we have to be pragmatic in terms of where are we going to support our CDFIs? And to your point, in terms of making this sustainable, it is that network. Right? I'm not going to say the major banks aren't doing a good job into getting into the communities, but it's literally the Chamber of Commerce's, right? It is the local organizations like Restoration. They're tapped into the community. They know the players. And so you sort of have to develop that web, right? And that's why we worked with True Fund and the Brooklyn Chamber, because they were able to penetrate Brooklyn in a way that no one else will be able to.
True Fund does
so you have to invest in the CDFIs to help build the capacity. So I'm going to say, for my predecessor, right, there's a couple things, right? There's obviously, there's a budget challenge, right? but I know Ken is here, Ken Eby, who leads BNYC. One of the things, we spent a whole bunch of time talking to 1,500 Black entrepreneurs. The biggest thing that came up was, we talked about it a lot, capital, right? But the second largest thing was community, right? And that's easy, right? The city, working with NYC and Company, EDC, they can do sort of like a Black business, event or whatever for a weekend or whatever, and literally encourage business owners to come together and develop that community, talk to each other, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing the city could do is something that I saw in Singapore, where government can use the buying power that it has to negotiate lower rates, right? So Danielle might need a point of sale system. She doesn't know who to go to, what to, and which systems are great. The city could actually do the vetting, figure out which is the best company for a small micro business, and then sort of make a bulk purchase, right? And then resell that to the businesses at a cheaper rate, right? So that's two. And then the third thing, I think, this is a little bit tricky, right? But we talked about marketplaces, right? We talked about the fact that there's all these sort of, and it's funny that you mentioned the spot, because the owner of the spot used to work at SBS. I love it when the SBS is all the way, we got SBS employees at Wells Fargo, we have SBS. There's no wonder why we're here, right?
Taking over the place, yeah.
So literally what City Point did was they couldn't get all the retailers that they needed, right? And there's a lot of vacant spaces in the mall, and they turned it into sort of like an ecosystem of micro businesses. There's a lot of vacant space in New York City, storefronts, that the city can sort of use and sort of take over those leases for a year, maybe 3 years, right? Because we know the first 5 years is a critical time, and sort of turn those spaces
Like
into sort of
pop-up
like,
shops
exactly,
and- yeah.
right? We see it in the restaurant industry. There's a lot of markets out there, right? And that's saving restaurateurs the headache of dealing
Exactly.
with the bureaucracy. We could do the same thing with sort of like the lifestyle businesses. That's it, I'm done.
Love it.
No, I think it's a really good point. I mean, a company capital, we sponsor an event, the Momo Crawl, if you guys haven't heard. It's an amazing event. And just for a few $1,000s, we're able to get a few thousand people to come to Jackson Heights, go on the Momo Crawl, and they also make some revenue from the sale of the tickets. There's a Momo app, so, any events like that, which drive people to different commercial corridors, I think is a great idea.
I think a wonderful example of that also is what Bridge Street has done with Tompkins Avenue, and Tama on Sundays. It has become a go-to event. If you've seen it, I mean, it has created a marketplace within Brooklyn, both on Tompkins, and I think they're expanding the Merchants Association to Lewis. And Restoration has always been the creator of place-based marketing, and so I had to get a plug in there. You said Together We Thrive. So that was one entity that was started. It was public-private partnership with United Way and a number of CDFIs coming together, including Mokafai, including LISC, Greater Jamaica, and we needed to, at that moment, which was the pandemic, help to create a marketplace and help to create networking for these businesses, because we saw that businesses in our communities, especially Black businesses, were dying on the vine, and we had to step in and do something, and that's how we came together with Together We Thrive, working with the city in order to create a networking marketplace as well as access to capital.
Well, I'd love to ask a little bit more about sort of ideas for the city and all of this. Given those success stories, and it really does strike me that in addition to the boom in business formation, the other silver lining of this pandemic has been rethinking how we use public space in ways that drive commerce, that support mental health and physical wellness and creativity and all these things. Not without challenges, but with some real benefits as well. And so I wanted to ask a little bit more about the role that the city can play here, especially getting at this idea that, well, yes, the city's got a $100 billion budget, but right now the message is no new kind of programs, no new money. So how do we kind of get more creative about the immense resources that the city still does have at its disposal, and especially around driving revenue? And I was really struck with some recent research that's come out that kind of dispels a myth. That basically shows that Black and Hispanic-owned businesses with comparable revenues and cash reserves to white-owned businesses do just as well. And that may seem like a simple fact, but the research is important, I think, saying those businesses with the same access to cash reserves and capital will thrive. But you're all working on that problem, but also the revenue part of this is a major challenge. How do we actually kind of create the conditions as a city to help drive more commerce toward our small businesses? So I wanted to just kind of keep going with this question, this line of thought here, but around specific actions or ideas that the city could take. So for instance, when it comes to local marketing, NYC and Company is marketing New York City to the world. are there more ideas here for actually getting more New Yorkers to explore businesses in all 5 boroughs and in their own backyards? You know, are there specific ideas that would say, hey, we're already doing, we have a major public space here, in the heart of Bed-Stuy, but there's more that the city could be doing to help us with temporary activations in other side streets, or making what may be happening on Tompkins happening in other, in Marcy or other areas. Are there things that, like the Momo Crawl, where it would be so helpful? You mentioned, hey, just a couple $1,000s and we can get thousands of New Yorkers exploring Jackson Heights and eating, delicious dumplings. But are there other things that the city could do to kind of help replicate or expand that approach? So I just wanted to open this up to everybody, but other specific ideas here that could help.
So I think it's not just, New Yorkers that you want to drive to these, commercial corridors and to events. What about the tourists? I mean, I forget the number of, hundreds of thousands of, people who come here. And I remember
66 million before the pandemic.
Billion or million or trillion. So I remember, at one point, Lonely Planet Guide had, a small paragraph and said, Queens and Jackson Heights was like the coolest place to be for, some reason people had voted. And there were a lot of tourists, when they would come, and I would have guests who would come and they would say, oh, we want to visit Jackson Heights. So something like at a sort of a bigger level, marketing plan, I don't know who's in charge of, taking care of the tourists who come to New York City, but there must be someone in the mayor's office. I'm sure there's a whole department. So if they, could go out of their way to promote these, commercial corridors, these areas that are much more exciting than, certain areas of Manhattan where you may have just the big, box stores.
I'd like to speak to that as well. I'm a member of an organization called Buy from a Black Woman. And they were developed to create a directory, an online directory of Black women business owners. And there are about 600 plus Black women business owners listed in the directory across the country. The organization developed a partnership with H&M, one of the top retailers in the world, right? And the partnership is focused on helping amplify the voices of Black women to support and raise awareness about their businesses. One of the efforts that they have is putting on a tour, which is actually launching next Saturday. So the tour is for the entire month of July. And during the tour, they're going to make 5 stops in different states.
Oh, nice.
The first stop is in Philadelphia, which I'm participating in. So we are presenting our work, our products, to the consumer base in that state, in that city. And they're going to 5 different places. So bringing our small business to their consumer base across the country, helping promote our work and our businesses has been really beneficial. I would say I participated last year as well, and my affiliation with Buy from a Black Woman has actually contributed to 35% of my revenue last year, which has been
that's
really great.
That's incredible.
So if the city can do something like that in support of their local businesses, small businesses here in this city, I think it would be really incredible.
I know for restoration through our business center, we've launched this backyard tourism, which is an activation where we are looking at businesses that are in our communities, in our neighborhood, and creating a place and a space, a resource on our website where people can go, and activate and learn more about the business and make it an event and an activation where they're able to see all the businesses that are in the community and in the neighborhoods. And we're using that as a resource so that people can learn about businesses if visiting our website, no matter where they are.
I think that one of the things this city did that I'm loving, I just would love to see some more of an expansion, is the open streets. It's become a really easy way to apply, close up. I know it's controversial, but if you allow for more businesses to participate in these open streets, considering it's so limited now, it gives you an opportunity to bring other businesses into those closed streets and, to your point, make it an event. Right, so if you can't afford, whether it's a storefront pop-up or these areas are already permitted, these areas are already closed off, and a lot of them go underutilized. And I think the fact that the city put this program out, to use it to its maximum, I would love to see an expansion so that you can focus certain weekends just on small businesses, micro businesses. And that's a wonderful support system for the city to really pat themselves on the back for this idea. And at the same time, it's a free marketing tool for the small businesses. And I'd love to see an expansion of that. Second for me is the work that business improvement districts and merchant associations do. I think that there's power in numbers. You know, when you look at some of the stats, businesses that were in business improvement districts fared so much better than those that didn't have representation. And I think with the city's help, I'd love to see more merchant associations become real tangible institutions, because one, invoicing, two, you have a better opportunity to do events, you have more voices under one corridor. In the Bronx, we suffer from a lack of representation in some of these corridors, and we do our best to try to push that. And I see my councilman here, and and he's very active with our commercial corridors. But I'd love to see, I think that organized entities can assist businesses on marketing, technical assistance, and the city's support of these, the push for more bids, more merchant associations, and more funding in those areas. They become self-sufficient after a while, and it'll benefit the small businesses.
I think a great example of that, at least starting in Brooklyn, but you need more, is TAMA, because it's the Tompkins Avenue Merchant
Right.
Association. It's part of the Open Streets plan. I think it's a wonderful example of how, when it's done right, what it can look like, and hopefully it can spread to other boroughs.
So I said I was done with those three things, but the thing that's missing out of all of this that we're talking about is social media, right? And how important social media. The reason why Tompkins is so like a thing is because social media influencers, right? Literally, I have people out of state sending me TikToks about restaurants that I know about, right? Like Snyder Avenue is the best like Chinese chicken wings. I was like, I know that. Now unfortunately, the whole world knows that, right? But TikTok and Instagram has a way of reaching, and when we're talking about in an area where budgets are constrained, you know, all you need is really like 3 or 4 really good marketers, right? People who know how to splice video, et cetera, et cetera. You've got a team, you're able to go to neighborhoods and present neighborhoods in a way that's local. And I know that the city could find 3 or 4 folks in all of the agencies to put together like a local neighborhood marketing team. So I'll just leave it out there. Maybe in the next
Potentially hiring some New York City small businesses to do it. But you know,
potentially so.
I will say I can attest to that firsthand. There's a really good but very low-key little deli not too far from where I live in Richmond Hill, Queens, where now the wait to get a beef patty is like 2.5 hours long, and it is entirely because of TikTok. But the owners are not complaining.
The oxtail beef patty?
That's it.
Oh, see?
How do you know that?
That's it.
Because of TikTok.
TikTok.
That's it. Yep. Or my case, just following my nose on one afternoon in Jamaica. But there you go. Well, listen, I want to make sure we get a few other voices in this conversation. This has been so rich and helpful and thoughtful. But we do have some time for questions from the audience. So here's how this will work. My colleagues have microphones on either side. Please lift up your hand. Let me know your name, affiliation. Please keep your questions very brief so we can get to as many as possible. Let me just see a good show of hands. I'll make sure I'm looking behind me as well. Okay, so Stephanie, starting right behind you, actually. Is that I see a hand on the right? And then one on the left, and then we'll go to the middle, okay? So we can, did that person put their hand down behind you? Okay, so then we'll start on the left here. I see in the, second, third row, right there. Yep, perfect.
Oops. Hi, Michelle Varian. I have my own business, design, retail, and manufacturing. And there are lots of things I could call out, but I'm going to go to the last thing we were talking about, which is, marketing and tourism, et cetera. I will say a little bit, tourists, beware, because my business was in Soho for 20 years, and as Soho changed and the interests of bids, et cetera, are not necessarily always entirely aligned with the business owners as much as they are with the property owners. And so that's something that I think needs to be sensitized. Having tourists coming to your neighborhood can often displace the existing businesses that support the community. because it's a very
I'd love
different
to.
customer base.
I'd like to answer part
Yeah,
of that.
I mean, I get it, and being a former, like I could say this, like, so Union Square is a perfect example, right? In the 70s, 80s, no one wanted to go to Union Square, et cetera, et cetera. It's the businesses that turned around Union Square. Then all of a sudden, Union Square became too expensive for those businesses. But those businesses got displaced over to Second Avenue, right? And now Second Avenue is a destination. Union Square becomes a destination. So unfortunately, I think it's like it's just how business. It's the cycle of businesses, right? You have a short period of time in the neighborhood that you're in, and then as part of your sort of business development plan, you need to also prepare for the fact that you may not be able to afford that business. Now, the city won't be able to tell you that, right? But I could tell you, based on the experience that I've had, that is one of the natures. But the way the city could actually sort of support the businesses that's been long term, I've seen this in terms of like local-based community organizations that own property that could
so
actually
ownership.
have a sustainable place, right? But you do also, because Berkeley did this, and none of the businesses in Berkeley are being supported by the local community because those businesses stayed too long there, right? So it's very sensitive, it's very difficult.
complicated, yeah.
It's complicated, but I think the city could do some things in terms of supporting,
Yes.
local organizations like Fifth Avenue Committee, et cetera, in terms of purchasing, sort of business, real estate that those businesses can sort of like thrive for a period of time, and then sort of you have that cycle.
So I want to join in here for a second as a former bid executive. What I find, yes, the bids are paid for by property owners. But what I learned in my years as a bid director is that the success of that corridor is based on the merchants and the turnover for merchants. So that if you really work with your board and you develop a program that's specifically for your area in support of your merchants, right? Because at the end of the day, property owners can pay, they're just looking for some stability. As a bid, what you're looking for is not only stability, but the capacity building within the district. What we found is we stayed true to the history of our corridor, right? So you can have programs like I Love NYC, which is a new program kicked off, super successful. And yes, tourist is a thing, but I think it's a matter of sitting your bid or your merchant association down and focusing on the fact of what's going to sustain, because the turnover of merchants helps no one, right? And although you look
Yeah.
at growth and you look at all that, it really is about the marketing within your corridor, which I really hang my hat on to be able to say if you've got a strip of stores in Westchester Square, it's very historical. And we kept it to that. So if you're coming into the area as a destination, you're coming to learn more about the history while you're eating and you're visiting the Huntington Library. And it's staying true to there. So the turnover has been very small without the impact of tourists, but the tourist is a complement versus hampering the corridor.
I know that the city is trying. I don't know how successful they're going to be. And when I say the city, the New York City council members, they have some legislation pending. I think it's called the Commercial Lease Stabilization Plan, where, landlords cannot increase the rent by 500%. I'm like, wow, 500%. So it's, so hopefully, it is. And I think it's complicated.
It's tough.
Because,
That's a whole
And I would like to
that's
spend
a
the
whole
next
other
15
panel.
minutes just debating ideas around commercial rent
Yes.
stabilization. So-
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hot
No, I
topic.
appreciate that. It's a great question. Let's see some other show of hands. Let's go to the very back row, and then just keeping an eye out for everybody. Okay, then we can head down to the middle. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Michael Bannock. I represent Baruch College at the City University of New York. The overwhelming majority of our students live in the communities that you alluded to. So you mentioned scaling up. What does scaling up look like for the development of the workforce for these new businesses?
It's a really good question.
Oh, for the workforce. So I think that's a great question. One of the challenges, and Lisa mentioned it, and Danielle could attest to this. So we're actually talking about micro businesses, right? And so we're talking about business owners who have, whether it's 5 employees or less, and I think even 5 is being generous.
Exactly.
It literally is 1, 2, or 3, right? And so the investment is actually on the entrepreneur themselves, and not actually like the workforce. The workforce, I think, we have to look at workforce in terms of industry, right? So we're looking at like healthcare, we're looking at, and I was talking earlier about maritime, where we're looking at technology, et cetera. But I think when we're talking about micro businesses, it's really the entrepreneur,
Yeah.
right? And so scaling up is actually all the things that we talked about in terms of helping that entrepreneur understand finance, marketing, negotiating leases, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a little bit complicated because I don't think these micro businesses are in a position to start hiring, the workforce that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And
So
even
if
if
we
we have this foundation.
So just want to quickly add, I agree with you, but we do have a small percentage of businesses, like we have a daycare center in Staten Island that has over 40 employees, but that didn't happen overnight. It took her years to, train and develop her staff for her business. So, I agree, most of our businesses, it's not something they think about. They tend to have 5 to maybe 25 at the most if it's a restaurant.
I mean, and for many of the businesses, I'm sure you'll attest to, you're talking about 1099s. I mean, they're hiring other consultants to help them with a very specific, nuanced aspect of their business. And so, and there are times where you need to understand what that looks like. And negotiations are critical and contracts are critical. So I do think if you're working with consultants, I think there is a way for organizations like ourselves to help you navigate even that stream.
Yeah, because it looks like cross-collaboration amongst other business owners at this point, in addition to doing this work right now to lay the foundation to be prepared to hire, because I do look forward to becoming an employer one day. So,
And I just want to add, we're sort of, because of lessons learned during the pandemic, we're more focused on how do we get our businesses to save and build their assets. So we're looking at not, helping them hire more, but helping them figure out how they have to hire less, but still be able to provide the product or service and build their assets and savings. So, that's our focus right now.
And I'd add one last thing. I think schools, right? The Bronx is the borough of universities. The students coming out of these schools are bringing in a talent that, and I'll use myself, my generation is not as savvy or as creative, and I don't know if that's the correct word, but I think the value of bringing on interns or students that are coming with a different perspective, actually, I have found that has helped build our chamber also, because you're getting really good ideas and everything from marketing on social media. They live on social media, right? This is where their homeworks are. And so that level of talent also builds capacity without a huge expense on the business. So the students are benefiting from real life experience and the businesses are getting the talent at a minimal cost.
Good point.
Thanks, Lisa. I think there's another question, right? Yeah, just right next to you, Stephanie. Right there. Yeah.
Hi, this has been fabulous. My name's Nina Rappaport, and I'm a vertical urban factory working on bringing manufacturing back to cities. And I wanted to throw in a whole other topic, which is that of, I'll stick with light industry and artisanal industries. And I'm wondering if we're seeing the same boom in that area, even with small light industries, as we are with more what you're talking about is commercial and stores and shops and retail. And I'm wondering if in the financing sector, we're seeing that need and request for startup funds, for capital, for real estate, as we are with retail space.
It's a hard one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to tell, because I do think that there are a lot of businesses that have started and people are working inside their homes. But there definitely is a need for light maker space. I think it's one of the things that we're taking a very hard look at Restoration when we think about what our new reimagined Restoration Plaza would look like. But I do think that there are many makers that are working and doing their businesses for Etsy, and they're working from their home, which is good for now, but is not ideal. So to the extent that they can have an affordable space that would be able to accommodate and provide storage and provide equipment for them, I think that's the right thing to do, and I'm sure that there is a need for that. We're not seeing as much of it, but I think that because many people are just hunkered down at their homes right now and just
yeah.
you know, trying to keep
Yeah.
their overhead as low as they can.
So we're seeing a few of our small percentage of larger small businesses. We funded it's called the Wandering Barman. They make, we funded the facility, so they make pre-prepared cocktails, and they're supplying, I think, 33 states. They're in 33 states. And then we have a cafe owner that has 3 cafes. They're looking at setting up a coffee roasting facility. They have a contract with Trader Joe's. So, most of our businesses are micro businesses, but there's a growing number that's more established and has, ability to get to the next level.
That's great. Question right in the middle here.
Hi, my name's Kathy. I'm with Hot Bread Kitchen. And I have a question about what I understand to be a gap in the lending market based on another CUF report on bolstering support for CDFIs, that there's actually a gap between lending sources for small businesses that need between $50,000 to $250,000, which is, I think, the amount that most small business owners need to get to that next level of growth, setting them towards a path of not just income generation, but wealth building generation. Yeah. So are there sources that you're all aware of that we can point entrepreneurs towards, or are there things that the city is working on to solve for that lending gap?
So, I'll speak about True Fund, only because my former boss now runs True Fund. A lot of people from Carver. So a True Fund is a CDFI that does reach to that level. I think they go up to 350,000, if I'm not mistaken, when it comes to capital. So they're working with slightly larger businesses than the micro businesses, but ones that are poised for scaling. And so there are CDFIs that are out there that are within that range, but part of that is knowledge and networking and understanding and knowing where those industries, where they are. And there are some banks that are actually providing financing in that space as well, but it's knowing, which organizations, which banks are able to do that, I think is really the issue that as a business, I'm sure you're having difficulty attaining. But I would say True Fund is definitely one of the CDFIs that works in that.
Yeah, I think, and I think Samira is here from the credit union. I think they do, and we do too, because we did a survey, and this was before the pandemic, and there was a gap from 50 to 100,000. We do make loans up to 350, but they are backed by the SBA Community Advantage Program. Samira and Ponds Bank, I don't know if you have that product. So, there's a lot of paperwork associated with those 350,000 CA loans. So we got funding to make loans, like normally they're 75 to 100,000, and those are actually easier to make than the micro loans. So if you need a loan,
there you go.
I think in this room alone, we have some really great individuals that if you exchange cards, talk about networking, because I'm looking at Ponce Bank, and Ponce Bank was a lifesaver for us in the Bronx and for all our businesses with these CDFI loans and outreach and education. So your resources are right in the room, and sometimes we don't even know it.
So I'm just going to, what we're talking about here, though, is, so Hot Bread Kitchen, we love Hot Bread Kitchen. There's so many different, businesses that have been launched out of Hot Bread Kitchen. But if someone goes to a bank, whether it's Chase or Wells Fargo, et cetera, and they're looking for that sort of like 50,000, 80,000, and they get declined, right? But one of the things that SBS was able to do was have that referral network. Right. But that referral network sort of gets interrupted whenever there's a change in leadership at the regional on the regional side. And so I think, figure out a way to create something that's sustainable, where the banks will talk to each other in terms of, if I can't make this loan, I want to actually refer it to Yankees organization or to Blondell's organization or to the Brooklyn Chamber or to Lisa, but I just need to know and have that sort of network. And so that's easy, sort of conceptually, right? But you just have to have the wherewithal and the commitment from our major banks to create something that's sustainable, that lasts beyond, sort of like personnel changes. And then I think you can make a big impact there as well.
That's great, Greg. Thanks. Yeah, Jonathan.
I'm sorry.
I know,
wanted
we've
to
been
ask a
going.
quick question. You know, one thing, you talked a lot about how important social media is to drive traffic, to drive customers to businesses and how successful it can be. But I want to ask the flip side of that, because during the pandemic, one of the things that happened is that so many of us in New York, I mean, record numbers of people just got used to shopping online, to staying at home and saying, I'll take that, you know? And I want to ask you, like, how can the city help drive e-commerce to smaller businesses like yours, Danielle? You know, it's like, I think there's a lot of New Yorkers that have a decent amount of wealth that would love to say, oh, I'd love to shop and buy your products, but how do I find out about you? You know, and I guess I'm curious the role of the city or of bids or other entities in the city to serve as platforms so that we can find out, we want to support a small local business in Brooklyn or the Bronx, but how do we kind of get there? Like, any ideas about that?
I would bring it back to the storytelling piece where, you know, if you are reaching out to small business owners and learning about their process, their work, their creations, and what they're putting out there, how can we put those on platforms where you're already reaching the audience that you're serving, and bringing that to them, whether it's on social media, online platforms, your websites, ads throughout the city, and ways where we can just talk about what we're doing. I think it just changes things. It changes the narrative. It brings you closer. It makes it more personable and human, right? Like, people buy from people. So bring that to the forefront.
Yeah, I think it's local activations, different organizations, different entities coming together. The Brooklyn Chamber very recently did this Made in Brooklyn and basically created a market for products that are made in Brooklyn in Industry City. So it's just having the ingenuity and the creativity to create markets, to create activations for vendors, opportunities for them to storytell, to demonstrate their wares. I think it's these organizations that are on the ground just being able to do that. And I think the investment in doing that is relatively small to ask a business to do that, but to get private funding to just say, hey, we're going to create this place, we're going to create this space on this Saturday or every other Saturday, being able to do that. And I'm glad to be working with organizations who have the ability, whether it's bids or chambers, restoration itself, to be able to create these activations for vendors. But I think that's what we need. You have to create markets again for people to come out. Because people want to come out, and people want to shop, and people want to see those things, but we have to create the opportunities for them to do that.
I guess also speaking to the larger market, I love being able to provide my products to my community, but I would love also for someone from California to know what I'm doing, and how do I do that? How can I reach those markets? And so that's why I go back to saying that the online platforms are just as important as in person. I've been going to markets for all of this year, which has been great, but now I'm meeting people from, when you talk about the tourist population, from Germany, they're stopping at the Grand Bazaar and they're purchasing my pieces, but they wouldn't have known about me if they didn't come in person. So how can I raise awareness and sort of boost the fact that I do have an online presence? I have a website.
Well, Danielle, on that note, I think we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
Now, this might be your moment to shout it out for folks. How can they find your products?
Yes, so if you follow me online, DMC Original Art, I create one-of-a-kind pieces of art that you can use in homes and workspaces, all inspired by the colorful flow of nature, coasters, serving trays, tables, wall paintings, and I also do refurbishments as well. So please check me out on Instagram, DMC Original Art. Those are my initials.
Should you bring some propaganda?
I did.
Postcards?
I have cards. I have business cards with my information on it, and
right,
I would love to connect with you.
Thank you so much. We wish you the very best with your
you.
business. If everybody could join me in a round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank you so much.
Great fun.
It was really wonderful. And don't go anywhere, because we're going to transition right into our second panel. So thank you again to our wonderful group of first panelists. We'll bring up our second panel right now. Council member, if you want to join us on stage, and Commissioner, if you're here, and we will get right into it.
I sit in the Bronx chair. Yeah, I think he needs a mic check. Thank you.
All right. Good morning. Well, we have to try that one more time. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All
Good
right.
morning.
Please, for folks that are still in the back, come on up and take your seats. There's seats in the very front. Don't worry about these reserve signs. Come on in, fill the room. And we're going to move right into this panel. So if folks could just quiet down and come take your seats. Thank you so much. Folks, if you could quiet down and come take your seats, please. We're going to begin. Thank you so much. And we're also joined by about 150 or so folks who are streaming online. So those folks are tuning in. Please, if you could keep your voices down so our folks online can hear as well, we really appreciate it. Come on in, take your seats, get close. All right. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's really a pleasure. I'll briefly introduce you both, and then we can just get right into the conversation, if that makes sense. So to my right, we are joined today by Commissioner Kevin Kim, the Commissioner of the Department of Small Business Services in New York City, which, as folks in this room know, is a city agency responsible for supporting the growth of strong small businesses and a thriving local economy in New York City. The commissioner is just in really his first year secured the largest public-private partnership loan fund in New York City history, which we just talked about for small businesses, and has launched Cannabis NYC, Small Business Forward, and established a Small Business Advisory Commission, among many other activities in just the past 12 months or so. As a son of immigrant small business owners himself, and a former co-founder of several small businesses, Commissioner Kim really understands firsthand the challenges of running a small business. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Commissioner. Thanks for joining us.
Eli.
And we are also joined today by Councilmember Kevin Riley, who hails from the Northeast Bronx, Council District 12. The council member serves as the chair of the Subcommittee on Zoning and Franchises and the co-chair of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus as well. And as chair, he really has served to prioritize creating equal opportunity and access for communities of color in New York City through legislation, oversight, and budget as well. We know there's a few things going on that front right now. And the council members also made several major investments in his district, including groundbreaking New York City public school improvements and advocating for $80 million to expand the summer youth employment program, among other things. Councilmember, welcome. It's great to have you with us as well.
Thanks for having me, Eli.
So we've heard a lot in this first conversation about the opportunity right now, with a lot of doom and gloom out there, locally in some senses, certainly globally in other ways. The growth of small businesses and really new entrepreneurs in New York City is a real silver lining from this pandemic period. We talked about some of the data earlier, an astonishing growth of about 30% more new businesses being formed now than were in 2019. The sharpest increase in new business formation happening in the Bronx, where we see more business owners forming than ever before. So I wanted to actually start with you, a council member. Take us on a walk a little bit in your district and tell us a little bit, do you see this entrepreneurial boom on the ground, and what does it look like to you?
It's amazing. I think when you looked at the pandemic, when people didn't have the opportunity to go into a brick and mortar and actually work, they wanted to create an opportunity to make some money for themselves. So that's when a lot of these small businesses came around. And you looked at many businesses throughout the district. Like, we had a lot of people go into the trucking business. That's why we saw a lot of 18-wheelers around our communities. We had a lot of people go into the cleaning business because we were in the pandemic and everyone was so focused on cleanliness. But the opportunities for them to kind of spread out, and I love the conversations that you guys were having before about marketing and really getting social media, utilizing the presence of social media to get the services out there. I think that was important. And something else I saw in the district is I saw a lot of people try to start small restaurants, because even though you couldn't go inside the restaurant, they were still doing carry out, Uber Eats, DoorDash. But the issue was a lot of people didn't know about the new restaurants. A lot of people didn't know about the cuisines that they had. The small Commissioner Kim and myself, we took several business tours where I introduced them to several small businesses where they had some amazing food. But unfortunately, a lot of people didn't learn about these amazing ideas. And when you guys were just standing up here, I just got an idea, like, that was an amazing idea. Like, we should really reach out to content creators, because I too learned about the beef patty with oxtail. I learned about pizza slice, cuts and slices in Brooklyn, which is a amazing establishment right now. So I think this is an opportunity right now for us to have these platforms where we could kind of come up with these ideas on how to modernize the business cycle today in New York City.
Thanks, Councilmember. And Commissioner, I want to ask you a little bit about really the heart of this conversation is about how do you go beyond step one? You know, there are good resources out there to help a business owner, help an aspiring entrepreneur develop a business plan, incorporate, file an LLC. What happens next? I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that the department is doing right now that are really aimed at helping to sustain business formation into the kind of the growth phase. Programs that you're working on to help businesses get started, you know, more efficiently, and obviously the Opportunity Fund, which has become a major new source of affordable capital to businesses that are looking to be able to grow. But tell us a little bit about what do you see as the most important supports for helping new businesses actually sustain and thrive, and what do you see as being the kind of successes of the department so far in that area?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here, and to Councilmember Riley, I will say I've done about 40 of these quarter walks with different council members, and Councilmember Riley is one of the few who've got me out a couple of times, and so the championing of small businesses in his district is real, and I've gained a couple of pounds because of all the food that he's introduced me to in his district. I think that what's happening is something that a lot of people talked about is when you're SBS and when you're the government, you already have so many incredible programs that are there to help all businesses, whether you're in the startup phase, whether you're in the growth phase, or whether you're in the mature phase. And so, you know, honestly, I'll give a shout out to former Commissioner Greg Bishop here, because I think SBS over the years has continued to add on incredible programming to help, but people don't know about it. And so when I came in, I said, well, you know, if we have all these great programs but nobody knows about it, it's all for naught, really. And the 330 plus people at our agency who work tirelessly on behalf of these small businesses need to get the word out. How do we get the word out? So we reorganized the agency, created our own outreach team. We took National Small Business Week, which was 5 days really in the past, and we said, we're gonna make this New York City Small Business Month. And in the last year when I started and we were celebrating National Small Business Week, we did 5 boroughs in 5 days, and it was a crazy schedule running me around. And so I figured, oh, if we do Small Business Month, they'll spread it out a little bit. But it wasn't so. They packed it in every single day. But the reason why I bring that up is because during that month of May, we were able to touch so many more businesses, over 1,500 businesses directly, service over about 1,200 individuals. And we were able to also highlight parts of our agency that people don't often hear about, which is workforce development. We manage the 18 Workforce One centers, and we're able to connect New Yorkers, any New Yorker, with a good job, good paying job, and also have training programs, free training programs around tech, healthcare, commercial driver's license. And these are all these programs that we have that people didn't know about. So how do we get that out? And then the second part of it was, again, something people talked about, just the social media aspect of it. So we really put an emphasis on social media, increasing views, over 50% of all of our programs. We did more video. That's what studies show, is that if you go video versus photos, still photos, you'll get a lot more views. And then we created making it more of a fun content. I know the Department of Sanitation does a really good job with their social media, but we think our Moby, which is the RV unit that we caricaturized into a little anime feature, we still think he's cuter than anything that they do. But Moby we created, for example, in the Schoolhouse Rock theme of 30-second Teach Me Moby. How do we get new legislation? How do we get new ideas, new programs, whether it's the Opportunity Loan Fund or whether it's telling people about the new waste bin rules that DSNY is putting out? We need to crunch it down into 30 seconds because the average small business owner does not have time to read the legislation, or they're not even really reading the newspaper anymore.
No, I appreciate that, Commissioner. Let me ask you actually a follow-up question on that point, because I think part of what you're describing is the need to actually get resources out to business owners. And we talked about this on the first panel as well. So many competing demands on your time, being asked to kind of jump through several hoops when, you don't even have the bandwidth to necessarily talk to the person who's in front of you, the customer that's in front of you. So I want to ask you a little bit about, because you touched on this with Moby, are there some ideas out there for how to get more of the one-on-one support out to more business owners in the community? I mean, we talked about the idea of going door to door, but it's costly and can be challenging. But also, we heard from so many folks on the first panel that, hey, most of the folks that we've worked with, the business owners or aspiring business owners, they don't know about the resources that are out there. Potentially, that's maybe the one of the most important roles the city can play is in educating and in making those connections. So are there some ideas out there for how you can actually reach more folks where they are?
Sure. So I think that some of the challenge with government is, we're very concerned about security over our social media channels, for example. And so TikTok sometimes is frowned upon by a lot of governments. But what we did was we found a media company that has their own TikTok channel. So we would engage the media company and give them the content to be able to do it through their channel versus, we have our own channel, but it hasn't quite picked up yet. So I think the social media and how you use it is really important too. I think that most small business owners too, they don't necessarily have time to check their emails. And so I think getting the understanding of which communities which use which social media channels is also important, or social communication channels. So for example, the Chinese American community, if you're not on WeChat, they're not going to find out about it. You can send it all you want in email, they just won't understand it, they won't read it. If Korean American community does Kakao, most people probably have never heard of Kakao. And then you've got, I think, a lot of the Latin American business owners from Latin America, South America, they'll use WhatsApp, for example. So if we can tap into which channels are being used by which communities at which time, I think we can be a lot more effective in our outreach.
That's great, Commissioner. Thank you. Councilmember, I want to talk to you about something you brought up when we spoke on the other day, and that is the opportunity to expand support for youth entrepreneurship. I want to ask you why you think this is so important, but maybe most importantly, what could be done to help more young people explore entrepreneurship or even take the plunge and actually succeed one day?
I think the idea came from when we're looking at society right now, we're seeing a lot of youth kind of straying away from the thought of going to college. And that's the sense of accumulating student loan debt, kind of putting them in the negative before they're able to make any money. With that same sense, we're still trying to push our youth to further their education, but we still want them to make passive income because a lot of them are very creative. For instance, I attend a school regularly to work with some young men there, the Academy for Scholarship and Entrepreneurship. Within this school, there are a lot of youth that have a shoe cleaning business, youth that do eyelash brands. My niece, actually, she does an eyelash brand, and now she went away to college and she does it on college campus. So that's another way that she can make passive income. So kind of encouraging our youth, like, hey, we do want you to make your way to further your education, but we also want to give you a platform and the resources so you can make some passive income for yourself. Because as we're getting older now, we realize, like, hey, we worked all our lives to work that one job, to get that one check, but it would be so much better if we had passive income where we could have multiple streams of revenue, where we could, if something happens where we're not able to work physically, we still have some other revenue coming in. So last year we fought the administration to include $1 million in the budget so we could fund some programs that will go out there and help our youth for entrepreneurship advancements and opportunities. We funded an organization called PUDS by Dr. Jamila T. Davis. They actually just did an amazing seminar in the Bronx with the Bronx Borough President and Assembly Member Chantel Jackson, where they were able to have the youth come out. They had their showcases, they had their QR codes, and they also invited Yandy Smith. Yandy Smith is a celebrity out there who came out. She showcased it on her page, and a lot of the youth were able to get a lot of, people to support their businesses. So just really pushing passive income out there, and this whole issue of us living check to check is something we really don't want our youth to live with. So just giving them other opportunities so they can make some income.
Well, Commissioner, let me ask you something about that, because I think there's no doubt when you talk to organizations that work every day with young adults and youth, you hear about the passion for entrepreneurship. It's only grown. Well, obviously, this conversation started with the idea that more New Yorkers are turning to entrepreneurship arguably than ever, and the business formation statistics bear that out. But I think there's a real concern then that you're not going to see enough support for helping those folks that are taking that first step to be able to kind of segue into steps 2 and 3 and be able to actually start and grow a business and have it be sustainable. I think part of what's needed, and we heard this in the first panel, is being able to actually leverage all of the effective organizations that are working in these different challenges or opportunities. And Danielle, the entrepreneur in the previous panel, she won the Brooklyn Public Library's Power Up Startup Competition. She was able to access support from the great Start Small, Think Big organization. She's been able to tap into affordable or free technical assistance along the way. But those experiences are often pretty rare, in no small part because most of those organizations are serving no more than a couple dozen to maybe a few hundred people a year. So I guess my question for you, commissioners, is there a role for the city in helping to scale up what's working, to help coordinate among all of these different local organizations that are actually doing something right, to take somebody that may be like a network for teaching entrepreneurship, or Build NYC that's working with youth and teaching entrepreneurial skills, but then to be able to bridge that into a program that's actually helping somebody develop a business plan and then navigate the process of accessing capital and figuring out how to boost your revenues and do marketing and build your sales. I'm curious what the role is of government in scaling up what's working.
Sure. So I think one of the key things about any entrepreneur is, we've talked about a capital access, but I think mentorship is huge. And I think a lot of times when we create mentorship programs, we just take a successful business owner and try to match them with some entrepreneur. But if they're not in the same industry, yes, there are shareable skills, but a lot of times if you are a nail salon owner and you want to be a bigger nail salon or on a greater scale, you should really connect them with a successful nail salon owner who owns multiple nail salons, for example. And I think that what we can do as a city is really try to let people know again about all the programs that are out there. Because if you're in one particular area of the city, you might know about your district programs, your district projects, but you wouldn't know about what's going on everywhere else in the city. I'll give you an example. NYCHA, they created a Boss Up program, and this is also very important to also show as an example why public-private partnerships are important. Because again, on the money side, Ron Moelis, his foundation put in money to help do the NYCHA entrepreneur competition. And so when we went to the award ceremony, there were all these businesses that were just starting up, some were in existence. You had a 9-year-old selling her own ice pop. It was incredible. But without the money to match it, without giving people the opportunity to understand that that program is even available, but now that that's successful, we want to highlight that, amplify it, and that's what we've been doing, trying to talk about how can we create a similar type of entrepreneurship competition for veterans, for example, and for other types of demographics that have been historically underserved with capital access. So I think that's one of the ways we can really explain to people. Another example, the Yankees and MasterCard did a small business competition. And that was, I was honored to be a judge on it last year, where you took local businesses, those were 5 borough businesses, and really looked at what they did. There was the monetary prize, but anyone who didn't win, we were able to connect them with all the free New York City SBS services. And I think we just need to keep growing that, and we need more private partners to kind of create their own competitions. I think 1010 Wins with former Commissioner Rob Walsh, they have a similar type of competition. I've seen many, many private entities on my social media channels say, hey, we've got this small business competition, but how do we get that all in one place is probably somewhere where we could help.
That's great, Commissioner. Thank you. Now, I realize we're already just a little bit over time for the beginning of this conversation. We did want to take questions from the audience as well. So let's give folks a chance to raise your hands. Same as last time, say your name, affiliation. I'm looking online as well. Tweet at NYC Future with any questions as well. And just please keep your questions short so we can get to as many as possible. So we'll go to the middle, and then we'll head over to the second row.
Thank you very much. First of all, my name is Ken Brown. I'm the District Manager of Bronx Community Board 5. Thank you, Jonathan and Eli, for another fantastic presentation. This is vital to my community. I have a raft of questions, but I'll limit it to one. In our community, Bronx Community Board 5, small businesses means bodegas. Small businesses means mom and pops that have been around maybe for a couple of generations. And during the pandemic, when PPP was rolled out, my business community could not access that due to the lack of technical savvy, due to the lack of standard bookkeeping practices and things like that. And working through the Jerome Avenue Revitalization Collaborative, what we've found is that what we really need to do is physically walk into these stores and places of business and literally figuratively, hold people by the hand to develop this savvy. And what we're finding is that there's a lack of dedicated funding for capacity building for these sort of coalitions or neighborhood-wide institutions and resources. That's one question. The other question is...
Okay, let me stop you there because I want to make sure we get as many questions out from the group as possible. But that's a good question. I think maybe getting at the idea around being able to actually go door to door, and you think that's important, Councilman?
Thank you for that, your service to the Bronx. And that's something that the commission and I, we did ourselves. We went door to door, restaurant to restaurant, store to store, to provide these resources. The issue is, and the commissioner brought this up, there's plenty of resources out there. The issue is we have to get these businesses to trust government, and that's the issue. When you don't trust government, you don't want to participate with these resources. And I'll give you an instance. I did a small business tour with the commissioner, and then after that tour, we did an oath resource fair where we had each city agency there. If you had an issue with a city agency, they'll be able to handle it for you right then and there. We did it on our White Plains Rural Corridor. Ask me how many businesses came. Just one. Just one. It's extremely hard because when we went into these businesses, a lot of businesses don't trust government. They think you're going to come there, we're going to give you these fines, and we're going to shut you down. And I think that's the issue. So we have to create a system where we do have this outreach team that can build a relationship with these businesses. That's when the commissioners come in, myself is coming. They already have this relationship with this outreach team. Also, we have to buy into the businesses as well. I love what Tompkins Avenue is doing. My wife lives over there. I love it. It's a model that this entire city needs to utilize. When you actually work with the community partners, you're working with people in the community, and you're setting up this foundation where people in the community can actually come out and support these businesses. And if I'm working with you now, you'll be more able to buy into coming out and supporting, you know, the city's resources. So I think it's really ties into the city doing a better job building positive relationships with our businesses instead of us having negative, you know, relationships with them, pretty much.
Thanks, Councilman. We see other show of hands, questions? So we'll actually go to the middle. I don't think we've heard. And then we can head over to this side. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pedro Suarez. I'm with Lift New York, a coaching program for parents of young children around their career and finances. And in any given year, we have anywhere from 10 to 30 parents of young children, particularly women, single women, that are either entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. And the question that I have is connected to what we've been talking about related to building capacity. I think instead of tackling the issue from like building trust with the government, that's a large, very large issue that involves a lot of things. I think you got to go to where the trust already exists. And so I think it's about getting out of the mindset of just working through organizations that are presented as entrepreneurial friendly or presented as economic development. It's about going to organizations that have access to entrepreneurs in general, like Lift New York, for example, like places of worship. Wherever there's the trust, you got to build on that trust. And so my question is, you know, how does the city plan on building the capacity of all types of organizations that might be interacting with entrepreneurs to just make sure there's a basic level of information and resources around what it takes to be an entrepreneur, because it's a career path, right? It shouldn't be viewed as something separate. It's a career path just like any other. What does it take to follow that career path? Because we would love to work with, you know, the parents in our program that are interested instead of handing them off to someone else that they don't know.
Sure, just wait for the microphone if you don't mind, just so folks can hear you, and we'll just keep it brief so we can hear from our panelists. Thank you.
Both at once.
Sure.
Hi, Danielle Mowry, and I'm just speaking in terms of trust. Filing for an LLC is something that really overwhelms a lot of entrepreneurs. So maybe when you're addressing the issue of trust and reaching out to people, how you also help entrepreneurs navigate that, because it also is a legal protection. And I think it's a really important thing. And I know, having been on the other side of it years ago in my career, running legal notices, it's overwhelming for people, and I can understand why it is. It's all those factors of trust and just not wanting to be official and being registered a certain way, and the cost as well. But I think that ties into the whole outreach that he was talking about as well.
Great, thank you.
On the question of the filing of the LLCs, we have 7 business solution centers around the city, and any one of them can help you. You can contact them either virtually or in person, and that should be the first stop. Yeah, exactly, knowing about them. And the trust question, I think the mayor has done an excellent job of doing that because he's been going around to meet with clergy in all different boroughs. But when he goes, it's not just him. He brings the entire city agencies with him. I've sat on several of them. And so when questions are fielded or when we are there before the mayor arrives, we are talking about the exact programs that each city agency does, and we're relying on the trusted messengers. Now, this trusted messenger question for small businesses is really important, in particular with Cannabis NYC. We launched that last August, and we have an extremely incredible founding director, Dashida Dawson, who runs our Cannabis NYC program. And how do we get that trusted messenger to convey that being in a regulated market is going to be better than continuing on with the legacy market? And so we understand how important it is to find the right partners in the community who already have that trust, because no matter what we do, we will always fall short by a little bit. And on the last point of that, even the numbers show it out. When we go out into the community, for example, one of the initiatives, New York City Business Express Service Team, NYC BEST for short, last year alone we hit 2,200 businesses, saving $22 million in fines. And we have a dedicated team of compliance advisors who are former inspectors who can go into your business, especially the restaurants and retail outlets would benefit incredibly from the service. But if you don't trust us, you're not going to be the ones to save on that money. So certain communities, we have to do extra work, make sure we have in-language services, in-language outreach team to go door to door to make sure they know about this.
That's great. Thank you. A question right there from Samira. Yeah.
Thanks, Eli. My name is Samira. I run Brooklyn Co-op Federal Credit Union. I wanted to respond to your point, which I think is very well taken, and also your response to the council member about the trust. The City of New York, I mean, all respect to small business services, but in another incarnation, the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection rolled out last year a pilot program to serve the self-employed with tax preparation. Brooklyn Co-op has been doing tax preparation for the self-employed and for small businesses for over a decade. I feel like this is giant. They have funded, I think it's 5 or 6 nonprofits through the City of New York. In Brooklyn, the provider is Grow Brooklyn, which is an affiliate of the credit union, to offer tax preparation for the self-employed and for small businesses. In our experience, tax preparation is one of those entry points. It's an avenue where people will come out and find you because that is something, it's seasonal, but then for small businesses, it's actually not seasonal. It's year-round, this need for tax preparation. And it also ends up bleeding into questions about incorporation and about the right structure. And it also actually bled into a lot of the PPP preparation because those who wanted to qualify for the PPP did need to have a draft Schedule C prepared. And so organizations like Brooklyn Co-op or Grow Brooklyn who were able to do that tax prep found themselves overwhelmed with that demand. So that's one way that I do appreciate the City of New York is currently trying to reach directly to real world issues of small businesses and the self-employed. And I also want to emphasize to your point that it isn't necessarily, okay, like it'd be great if we could get there, if they could trust, but maybe not soon. And so the important thing is for organizations and for the city to find the places where there already is that trust built up. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, and that's a very amazing point, and what you stated earlier too. I think for us to work with credible messengers within the communities, local CBOs, what you guys are doing for the small businesses in Brooklyn is very important, and small businesses feel comfortable coming to you. And that's what the city has to do more of, is work with our local CBOs, because we do have amazing resources out there. Seriously, when we're walking store to store and we're letting, and the commissioner is just hearing business owners talk about their issues, and he's very approachable, and he's just giving them, advice with the resources, I think is very helpful. But for them to have a resourceful CBO within their community that they can actually go to on a daily basis, I think that would be more, beneficial for that community. So thank you for that point.
And just one quick, DCWP does do training on personal finances, and for the first time ever, they co-located with one of our business solution centers, because we know that personal finances for entrepreneurs is very intertwined with their business.
That's great.
We're out of
time. So I just want to thank this amazing panel. Can I get a round of applause? Okay. Council member, commissioner, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Can anybody give a round of applause to Eli for once again moderating such a great panel? But seriously, both of you, really amazing and great work, both of you in the council and SBS for the work you're doing. Thank you all for being here today. Those were amazing and excellent questions. I feel like there is such an opportunity here. I feel like this is such an area of strength for New York City right now, and it's great that we've got such amazing things happening. I appreciate y'all being here. I want to also thank again our amazing partners and sponsors from Wells Fargo, so John and all of your team there at Wells Fargo. We really appreciated having this event with you, so stay tuned. We're going to keep working on issues related to entrepreneurship and small businesses. If any of you have ideas for us, of things we ought to be doing, other panels, other forums, or reports, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or my team. Also, speaking of my team, I want to give a big thanks to Stephanie Arvalo. I don't know if Stephanie is still in the room right now, but she once again has put together an amazing event. So a big cheer to Stephanie, and thank you for all the great planning and organization of all of our events. And thank you again. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you.